And now what we're going to do is dive in with Alexander Moore. So he is an associate professor of environmental health at the Long Island University, climate change institute group leader. He's a fellow of the Royal Geographical Society, Theodore Roosevelt Institute, and Explorers Club. He really doesn't seem to stop very much. And so I'm very excited to welcome in Alexander to take us away on a little bit of his journey working to understand ecosystems, how they're changing with human impacts around the globe. So Alexander, welcome into the podcast, man. Nice to meet you. And unmute. There we go. I didn't say that in a while. There has to be one. There we go. Hey, man.
The motto of the pandemic, you're muted.
There should be a cat in every broadcast as well, even if you don't know one.
Right.
Just have the fun. But yeah, I want to hear your talk. Feel free to dive in and we'll get underway.
I'm assuming you can see the slide, yeah?
We're all good. You're all set.
All right. So as Jesse said, I work on environmental health. I'm a researcher in environmental health. I look at how the impact of climate change affects people's health and ecosystems, and how we affect the ecosystem and therefore our health and cycle. That cycle is sometimes referred to as One Health, where the health of environments and animals are also directly connected to the health of people. However urbanized and urbane you may think of yourself, you are in fact living in nature, and there are all sorts of things happening around you that make your life possible, that are part of nature, and that we are in fact affecting with pollution and climate change on a daily basis. And just to give you an idea of how important nature is to people during the pandemic, particularly early part of the pandemic, this is a graph of where people went as they were blocked from doing the city things, the urban things of going to workplaces and or go shopping or go find food. Most people instead reverted to parks and nature, which is what we evolved to live in, and nature. And this is how crucial this has been to people's mental health and wellness, particularly in urban areas. This is my area. This is where I live, and it's a map that you may not recognize, and that's totally fine. But it's in fact a map of where wildlife is and where biodiversity is around me. And I encourage you to find your own biodiversity map for your region of the world, and go find the critters, because the critters will actually make your life a lot better. They'll make you appreciate the environment you're in. I do that on a regular basis. I love diving, and these are some of my favorite critters. We'll start on a positive note. Longfin squid are actually doing okay in the new climate reality that we are creating, and they are some of the most amazing creatures around. And this is another one, very rare favorite, northern pipefish, which lives in seagrass meadows that are some of the best carbon fixers on the planet. And this is a northern puffer. And the reason why I'm taking some time to pay attention to these critters is that if we don't pay attention to the beauty of nature and where it is, we might forget that it's there, and we might forget how important it is to protect it. You can't protect what you don't know. I'm also paying attention to these things because I want, even innocuous photos like this are actually capturing a climate reality that most people are unaware of. And this photo, which seems innocuous to you, you're actually seeing native algae being suffocated by invasive algae, which we imported, humans, into the northwestern Atlantic, through tankers that washed their tanks in the Sea of Japan and the Northern Pacific, and then travel to the Northern Atlantic and release the spores of these red algae that you see here. And because of how we're warming the planet and how we're warming the oceans, these algae found the perfect environment, and they can reproduce and continue to cover all surfaces throughout the year. The name of the species is Heterosiphonia japonica, if you want to know. And by the middle of the summer, this is what it looks like. You'll see underwater wildlife glide over carpets of this red algae. And in fact, the carpets can be as thick as 2 to 3 feet, even as far north as Maine, which you can see here, covering and suffocating wildlife that lives on the seafloor or that feeds on the seafloor, including the beloved lobsters in New England. So this has an effect on the economy of and your health or your ability to get food and people's ability to make a living, but it has an effect on the wildlife itself. I have to make both points because usually not everybody really cares about the animals or believes that the animals have a right to exist independently of whatever service they provide to us. We don't see these events. We don't see this invasion and these drastic changes underwater because most people don't dive. Only 0.05% of people really ever go underwater, and so occasionally you'll see events like this where the algae are washed on shore by currents and tides, and they become a week-long nuisance that some people, maybe some local papers, will report on, but there's really not a lot of awareness about what is actually how the underwater world is changing due to climate change. In fact, if you want to find any research on this particular species and how it's creeping into the North Atlantic, how it's expanding due to climate change, you'll find that most of it was published about 10 years ago. There isn't a lot of funding for it, again, because humans don't live underwater, that we only generally care about how underwater environments provide us with services like food or oil or most recently and tragically deep sea mining. But we don't really care about how the environments are changing. In fact, the northwestern Atlantic and the northeastern coast of the United States has warmed faster. The ocean has warmed faster than 99% of all other bodies of water in the rest of the world. And in the past 35 years, matching an overall trend on land as well. This has caused some of the keystone species in the ocean to migrate away or be overfished or not be able to survive. The major one that's famous, everybody knows because there are several geographic areas named after them, is cod. And cod is currently at a very, very low population of what it should be at, and because of overfishing and because of climate, and we believe that it has migrated out of our ecosystem already, as shown by my colleague Andrew Pershing. If you don't go diving, as I have, you will find cod still, but it's mostly juveniles, and the big specimens are no longer available. The warming of the oceans is also affecting big megafauna, particularly marine mammals such as this humpback whale, because as the oceans warm, the bacteria and other pathogens that live in the oceans flourish. So all bacteria love warmth. If you've ever spent any time in a biology lab, you know that. And some animals are able to survive these changes in the marine ecosystems, and some are not. These unusual mortality events that we are seeing all throughout the coast of the northeastern United States are actually most likely due to that type of change in the biome of the ocean and the number of bacteria and the nature of bacteria that are flourishing because of warming temperatures. So we've been talking about how the oceans are warming, and of course it's a result of climate change. So how much are they warming, really? Well, if you think of all the heat in the Earth's climate system being trapped by greenhouse gases, this much has been trapped in the ice by melting, as you can see here over time. That has increased, not much, but it has. This much has been trapped by land. This much is trapped by the atmosphere, by the air. So when you think that you go out and you feel that it's really hot outside, well, the atmosphere has trapped more heat, but it's that much, that little compared to the rest of the heat. This much is trapped by the deep ocean, and this much is trapped by the upper ocean, the upper 200 meters or 600 feet. That adds up to 63% in the upper 200 meters and 31% in the rest of the ocean, which is 94% of the heat in the Earth's climate system now trapped by the ocean, captured by the ocean. We are actually alive and not frying because of the ocean, thank God. This is where you live, and that's 6% of the heat. 6% of the heat is absorbed. Only 6% of the heat is absorbed by what we have around us. This affects 94% of the heat going into the ocean affects how much bacteria there is, and you can see also the suitability of the ocean for bacteria becomes much more increases much more as temperatures rise, and this is the suitability of the ocean for cholera, which is ocean-borne pathogen, can be found in ocean water, which is why whenever you have a climate change-induced storm, particularly in the tropics, cholera is one of the common results. These changes, these extreme changes, are happening because of extreme events. Not just a 1 degree average over time. When we talk about a 1 degree world or a 2 degree world, we're talking about averages of averages of averages. In order to move such an enormous average of all regions of the world over time, we actually have to have a lot of extremes, a lot of extreme events. If you ever had a D in college and you know how an extreme event like that can change your average, well, we're doing that constantly with extreme events all throughout the world. In the northeastern United States, you can see this, how we are in fact warming a lot faster than the rest of the world. You can see in this map how the northeastern United States has warmed, and we've actually lengthened the summer, almost doubled the length of the summer. As a result, of the carriers of Lyme disease that have reproduced, those are ticks, arachnids, that can be found in the woods, and that's why we all know about checking for ticks every time we go into woods. And you can see here how when ticks reproduce and increase in number, Lyme disease also increases. And this is Lyme disease cases following the increase in temperature in the Northeast, as you can see here in recent years. And of course, as this has an effect on the various ecosystems, particularly the wild ones that which we managed to protect, like the Adirondack Park, one of the best protected state parks in the country. Over the last 20 years, Lyme disease has crept in, leaving only really one county untouched by it. So the number of ticks has increased, and then the number of cases of Lyme has also increased as a result. And this is because, again, we have lengthened the summer and we've warmed the temperatures with climate change by 1.5 degrees in a conservative estimate, which is enormous. In the last 70 years, that's enormous change. So again, when we talk about 2 degree world, 3 degree world, we're talking about averages, but to make those averages, we have local extremes already happening right now. Climate change is not something in the future, it's happening now. It's affecting animals like moose, also known as ghost moose, moose that carry as many as 40,000 ticks on them as a result of infestation, as a result of climate change, and never really reach adulthood. Usually they die of disease. And again, if you look at how even the National Geographic titles it, it's a worrisome decline in a species that's crucial to the region's economy. Okay, what about the species itself and, it disappearing and, it having a right to actually exist? Who cares about the economy? This is not happening just in the Northeast; it's happening worldwide. One of the most common, one of the few cases that have actually been covered by the major news is the decline of the saiga antelopes. 85% of them die in 2015 due to climate change-induced epidemic of a bacterium. I can tell you the name, but you don't care. The bacterium was already in their gut and in the environment, but because of climate change, the concentration of the bacterium really skyrocketed. And the result was that 85% of these very cute animals that look like something out of Star Wars died within a week. It was a massive death event, which was eventually found to be due to changes in climate. So these events are happening all the time, all around us, and they're rarely reported. And we have caused these events for the last 2,000 years by deforestation, reduction of wildlife habitat, and therefore biodiversity, animal domestication, and wildlife trade, and man-made climate change. And epidemics that come from these, from this type of encroachment on the natural environment are all diseases that we know about, that we are familiar. If you read on the slide, those names of diseases are quite familiar to you. So I'm going to interrupt for a second and give you a PSA. The single best thing we can do to prevent the next pandemic is, in fact, to ban wildlife trade right now. We can do it. It's the most important thing we can do. It'll preserve biodiversity, but it'll also preserve your health. So write your congressmen and senators and lobby and raise awareness. The reason why climate change affects health is also deeply rooted in the migrations that are happening around us all the time. As animals migrate, they carry with them their diseases. And as humans migrate, they also carry their diseases with them. And we only ignore these processes at our own peril. All these migrations we rely on for our food, due to pollinators, for harvesting food. And as climate changes, these cycles that have existed for at least 13,000 years in the Holocene are being changed radically. One example for mosquitoes, for example, they don't really migrate, but they do move into a habitat that is more suitable for them. And this is where they were two major mosquitoes that carry Zika, yellow fever, and dengue. This is where they were, and this is where they are now, reaching all the way to Maine, essentially. So we can have tropical diseases reaching all the way up to Maine. And this is where malaria, carried by another type of mosquito, is currently, and this is where we can expect it to go if we exceed the Paris Agreement goals, and this is where we can expect it to go if we don't do anything. This means that malaria would reach pretty much every inhabited area on the planet by 2080. And birds, last, I promise, we started from the ocean, we'll end up in the air. Birds also are migrating and carrying diseases with them. And as they change those migration patterns, they will also change our disease environment. This was something that I tracked in one of my recent articles, tracking a climate anomaly previously unknown. During the Spanish flu pandemic 100 years ago, the greatest pandemic by number of dead in the history of humanity. A huge climate anomaly interrupted the migration of the major vector of disease of the H1N1, the Spanish flu, in 1917, 1918, particularly in the fall of 1918, when the second great wave of this disease happened. It interrupted these guys, particularly the mallard duck, which is a very common bird in our backyards and parks. These ducks reach 60% infection rate in the fall, and interrupting that migration, they essentially polluted the water in Europe, where hundreds of thousands of soldiers were waiting in the torrential waters of a climate anomaly we created, which I can explain how later. and they got infected by the virus this way, as well as due to a weakened immune system due to the climate anomaly. The result was that as rain increased, so did the number of dead. And you can see the double peak right at the end of 1918 and beginning of 1919, double peak in rain and double peak in mortality. So in fact, by changing climate, we do change health, and that is crucial to learn and understand and remember. Just to give you an idea, 50 million people died during that pandemic compared to 28 million during COVID. Of course, this is not to diminish the impact of COVID that everybody has had. We published that article, and we received some quite a bit of attention for it, because this is the new pioneering field of system biology, system dynamics applied to climate and health, also known as planetary health. So the last message I'll leave you with, if you forget anything else I've said in this very rushed talk, is that climate changes health, and we change climate and biodiversity. And I know this is a little dramatic. We change health, and therefore protecting nature protects us. If you don't care about the animals, maybe you care about your own health, and you'll care enough to protect it and act on climate now. This research has been is going to be continuing in center. It's a center on the screen. I'm not going to tell you the full name because it's a very NASA-like acronym that's very long. But all the universities on the screen and foundations and nonprofits are involved. And I'm happy to take questions now. Thank you so much.
Holy, I think of all our 50 plus talks so far, Alexander, that was the most detailed information back to the 20 minutes we've ever had. We could unpack every slide you had for an hour each, I think. But go back to, I'm kind of sad to hear that mallards, one of my favorite birds, are the villains in this story, but you highlighted that as a single most important thing to take away from your talk, end sort of global wildlife trade. So what does that actually mean? Is that shipping fish across international borders, like getting tuna from Japan to here? Is that treating animals in sort of wet markets, which is a phrase that a lot of people know now? What does that actually look like and entail in concrete terms?
In concrete terms, it would mean that, wildlife trade, there's a legal and an illegal part. Both should be banned, obviously. The legal part is already banned. I'm not really referring to fishing, although we are overfishing all the oceans, as my friend Sylvia Earle will tell you. I'm really referring to particularly the wildlife trade that requires humans, that implies that humans are going into forests or are going into savannas, are going into wild habitats and taking wild animals and therefore coming into contact with them in order to sell parts of the animals or the entire animals on various markets in Asia and the United States. If you want to know, if you want the latest proof that this is extremely dangerous, monkeypox is emerging all throughout the world right now as the latest and greatest in the result of this type of completely unnecessary and extremely cruel market.
Yep.
So it should be that is what I'm particularly addressing, the wildlife trade of animals that are in their own, particularly on land and in wild habitats.
I'm really glad we've got an audience coming from all over the world today, and of course our speakers are global as well. So just to sort of sum it up for everybody, I think that's fantastic. And on a positive note, amidst what was frankly a fairly alarming litany of things that we're facing as a species next little bit, you did start your talk with this idea that connecting with critters and being close to animals is a really positive thing for instilling a mindset towards wildlife of conservation, of just getting out in nature in general. Is there a way for our audience everywhere? How would you recommend people get outdoors? Is there a tool, tip, technique? Is there any things that could make that more enriching for people? Anything that we could encourage people to get outdoors a little bit more?
Well, I think it's a lot easier for most people than they think it is. But there are many organizations that foster this type of exploration. One is the Explorers Club. The other one is the Linnean Society. The other one is the Royal Geographical Society. But you can find your local birding group or your local nature group on your choice of social media and just join them. These groups mushroomed, no pun intended, throughout the pandemic. I spent part of the pandemic, in fact, most of it in New York City, and there was multiplication of birders. I can't say that I've never seen so many people become passionate about nature. It was beautiful to watch. And this, I know, happened everywhere. So it's not hard to get out there. And as I said earlier at the beginning, you can find maps to figure out where animals are. You can find maps of biodiversity. All states have conservation departments that provide such maps. There's one for the New York State. There's one for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Those are the two states I'm most familiar with. But you can also, use apps like AllTrails or, what have you to find the best places, the green places close by. There are a lot more than you think. I created these maps throughout the pandemic for my friends so that they could go out and explore. And it's actually quite, you'll start learning and knowing where you've lived in a completely different light.
I love that. And I love that you mentioned New York City specifically, because I think there's this tendency, certainly among the youth that we regularly work with, to think, oh, wildlife's in East Africa and it's in the Great Barrier Reef and the Amazon, and those places are teeming with wildlife. But if you're in the heart of New York or Singapore or Hong Kong, those places have all manner of creatures, big and small. And I think whether it is AllTrails, we always encourage folks to use iNaturalist, the Seek app. These are great ways to learn about all the things that live near you and around the globe. And I think that changes you when when you view the landscape that you live in that way. It really does make you more cognizant of these broader issues, whether it's climate change, biodiversity loss for our international day-to-day. So I appreciate that very much.
Absolutely. And I think all the apps you mentioned are really useful. Using AI for understanding nature around you is really life-changing. And I should say that historically people were a lot more familiar with all the plants, trees, and animals that surrounded them. We are one of the most ignorant generations about, the basics of nature, because people before had to deal with the trees and the, harvesting and animals, and we kind of choose to avoid it. We spend our times in front of screens. So definitely important to, it's kind of like collecting. You can use these things to identify birds and trees and other animals, and soon you'll get you get addicted to it.
I know if I had the apps when I was a boy, I would have done very little else. And so I'm kind of glad that they existed as I became like 25. And okay, I can settle into this. I know where my addiction limit is. Alexander, thank you so much for joining us today. I know we could talk all day about this. You did highlight at the end of your talk, if people want to check you out on social media, Nature of Alex, a really great way to keep learning going. And this might be the most ignorant generation, but we had the Youth 2030 people just before you. So if more people get on board with their sort of campaigning and an amazing work, I think we can slowly but surely change that and get that broader connection back with the wilderness around us. So I really appreciate the message today, and keep up the neat work, man.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jesse. Thank you for having me.